Hi guys, it's Nomes here. I've had a few people at MCM Expo at the weekend, as well as a few PMs since then, requests to know how I went about making my Hyperbolic Time Chamber Saiyan armour for Gohan. So I thought I would do a quick run through for you guys. This sort of armour would work for Hyperbolic Time Chamber, so the Cell Saga, also for Bardock or Fascia, basically any of the types that don't have the large shoulder pauldrons. So that's what it looks like at the front. On the sides, you can see that's where it seals together. Get in and out. And the back. And the other side, again, it seals here. So you can just open it up like a couple of flaps. Now, to make my armour, I started off with a base of a foam called Plastazote. Most people make their Saiyan armour out of foam. Predominantly, you'll see people talking about EVA. Now, Plastazote behaves very, very similar to EVA. It's a bit more porous, so it takes more sealing. The reason I tend to buy Plastazote over EVA is because I can buy it in large sheets. And I prefer to work with a large sheet of foam than to buy the floor mats that you have to get any EVA in any large sizes. I get it from a shop called 4D. It's near London Bridge. They have an online shop as well. It'll probably be worth a while shopping around though, because I go to them because they're my local. I'm pretty sure you could probably get it cheaper elsewhere. It comes in black or white predominantly. I think there are some sellers that do other colours. But it also comes in a variety of thicknesses. Now for my Saiyan armour I used 5mm thickness. And in its first stages, this is what it looks like. So it is just foam. Just like EVA, you can heat form it. So once I had the shape I wanted, I could heat it to get this curve to it. One thing I did do additionally, though, to get the shape, is once I had my basic cutout, I added darts. There's a dart just here. You can just about see the edge of the glue here. And the same on the other side, and also down the middle. That's just little triangles taken out of each space and pulling the foam together and gluing it shut. And what that's done is give me that curve at the top that you can see there, because I wanted the pectorals to be more pronounced. Now you're probably looking at the front and thinking that you can't see those darts and that I've done an incredibly good job of hiding them, and well, that's just not true. What I did was I added additional panels of Plastazote to the front here and the pectorals to make them extra raised relative to other sections of the armour. I heat formed those over the top of the base and glued them down with EvoStick contact adhesive. On the back I also did a dart down here, which you can very faintly make out if the light catches it right. It's covered by this piece of duct tape here, and that gives it that rounded shape across the top. When I was getting the basic pattern for my armour, I just took a t-shirt that fitted me well, and I drew around it. I flipped the sleeves to the inside so I could get the right sleeve shape. And once I had that basic shape on a piece of newspaper, I also extended it further on the sides, so that later, when I was trying it on me, I could cut it down to make sure it was the correct armhole size. I also, at this point, shaped out how I wanted the front to look. Usually when I'm doing a pattern, I will draw half a pattern so that I can mirror it and make sure that both sides are going to be completely exactly the same. Once I had my base with the darts in place and these panels in place, I also drew out the shape that I wanted the entire armour to take to make sure it was going to be symmetrical. The next step was to attach the slats. The reason I attached the slats next is so that I can hide the slat joins with these raised sections when I get to them. Now these slats are made out of 2mm standard craft foam, EVA, that you get in a lot of hobby stores, Hobbycraft for instance. 4D do sell this as well. And I just drew out a pattern of this shape, worked out how large this was, divided it up into 1, 2, 3, 4 to make sure that they were going to be fairly equidistant. Do factor in that this one is naturally slightly larger because of the point. And I divided that number and cut out my slats of craft foam. The next step was adding these narrow raised areas, and for those I used this stuff. It's called Baccarod, and I just bought it on eBay. I think I got about 10 meters for a $5 or so. I didn't just glue it straight down. What I did was I sliced it so that it was about 3/4 of a circle and had a flat edge, and that flat edge is what I glued into place all the way around. You have to do it in smaller pieces and cut at angles to make sure bits join together neatly, but it gives you a really nice raised rounded edge. Once I'd done that, I glued these down with Evo stick as well, the same as the EVA. In fact, predominantly I used EVA on this armour with some hot glue. The hot glue is purely reinforcement mechanism. It actually doesn't hold the majority of the strength. It was just an extra security measure to make sure it wasn't going to spring apart on me at any point. For this wide band here, which as you can see is completely circular, I used this stuff. This is called Climaflex, or pipe lagging. And it has this convenient slit already in place all the way up it. Now, sometimes it's not a completely clean slit, so you might have to take a knife or scissors all the way up to smooth it out. But because of it, it slots very neatly into place onto your piece of Plastazote with not too much effort, and then you can just glue it down. This is where I had to be careful, because this Climaflex is very, very stiff, and as a result, the heat forming I'd done to my Plastazote was being undone by the stiffness of the Climaflex, and the armour was straightening out. You have to be careful heat forming the Climaflex, because it melts very, very easily. Apply too much heat and you just end up with a sort of mush, which doesn't look very much like Saiyan armour. So as a result of that, I then went back into the inside of my armour, and what you can't see underneath this strip and this strip is that there's a piece of wire. And I just used a piece of duct tape over the top to get it into place, got the shape that I wanted, and then used a load of hot glue to make sure that that duct tape wasn't going to go anywhere. I did the same for the front. So there's a piece up here, and there's a piece along here. And I also took then some little pieces of wire that extend about that far and inserted them into the Climaflex for additional support. And those have allowed me to bend the armour into shape. And it was actually quite helpful, because then once the armour was on me, I could shape it without having to try and heat it while I was wearing it. The Climaflex I used is a 19 diameter hole with then 15mm thickness of foam. The Baccarod is about 15mm diameter by itself. Now, the straps, this is somewhere where I was slightly different from most Saiyan armour. Usually people just use foam to make their straps, but what I did was I actually made straps initially by stitching webbing through the foam. So I looped it round and stitched it in place up here. And then I could hide the joint underneath my Baccarod. For the slats, they are just 2mm craft foam, the same as the slats here. The reason I did it this way is because it means the shoulder pieces are very, very flexible. That makes it nice to move in, and it means that the armour will sit down on my shoulders, whereas if you make it out of craft foam, it becomes quite stiff, and often you'll find the armour rides up, or that the straps aren't flush to your shoulders, so it looks like the armour is floating on you. And that was the point where I had finished armour that wasn't painted. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Plastazote is quite porous, so it requires quite heavy sealing. Now, they often talk in the series about how Saiyan armour is one size fits all and is very, very stretchy, so it can fit anything from little Gohan all the way up to an Uzaru form Vegeta. So I wanted it to have a slightly rubbery texture, so I got myself some latex. I had some upholstery foam lying around, so I just used that. I ripped chunks of upholstery foam and poured some of my latex into a pot and used that and applied the latex with the foam. And I did about maybe 5 layers of pure latex initially. Then I mixed white acrylic in with the latex, and I went back over it for a couple of layers with the white acrylic and the latex. You might have to change out your piece of foam every now and again, because you will find as the latex dries you end up with just a rubbery stump, or it can cause you to have little raised bumps because solid pieces of latex rub off your foam. So make sure you keep changing your piece of foam. You'll get through quite a bit. Once I'd completely whited out my entire piece of armour, I then got Lumiere Jacquard paint in gold, and that's what I used for these sections. The reason I used that paint is simply because I had it around. You could probably use any other acrylic gold paint or yellow paint, depending on your preferences for colour, or green in Bardoc's case, and then in that case you'd swap out the white acrylic for black as well, and you'd start with a black base. That very much depends on which armour you're working on. I also painted white over the top of the latex for all the other panels. Finally, once I had my gold sections done, my white sections done, I took some black and I shaded in all the deep parts of the armour. And this adds a greater depth, particularly in photos, and it can make it look more real, even if it looks sometimes slightly odd in person. It actually looks amazing in pictures. Whereas for here, I used a very light brown in the cracks. I did try it with black initially, but it was too dark, so use brown. Black very much around the edge, but brown between your slats. The only exception was here, where I actually did use black between the slats, because it matched up with the black of my webbing underneath, and it looked much better than the brown. I tried both. And finally, I sealed it all again with a couple of coats of PVA. And that's pretty much how I made my armour. I suppose the only thing left to say is here I seal it, opens it up like that, and it's just the strip of velcro down this side. So I put in a flap of EVA that overlaps slightly, and then I attached a piece of velcro there to that EVA flap, and then on the other side I attached the opposing piece of velcro directly to the foam, and then when you bring them together they seal up like that. And that's it, really. If you have any specific questions, please don't be afraid to post them in the comments, and I will do my best to be of help. I hope this was helpful.